Welcome to the West Virginia Case Podcast, hosted by Les Odell. Join us as we dive deep into all things strange, including Bigfoot, aliens, ghosts, and more. Pull up a chair and set for a spell. It's going to be a great time. Now, without further delay, let's get the show started.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey folks, welcome back to the West Virginia Case Podcast. I got a couple of things that I want to say before we get started. The first thing I want to say is I want to give a heartfelt shout out to our friend John Turley over at oh goodness. Sorry, John. I've had a blank on your, but anyway, John Turley, we are sorry. We do want to give you a heartfelt shout out. John lost his mom here recently, and we just want to say our hearts and prayers go out to you, John, and we're sorry to hear about your loss. The other one is I want to give a thanks to Bill Rigby. I want to say thank you to Bill Rigby for sponsoring us with the Agents of the Unexplained. Without Bill Rigby, I don't think we'd be where we're at right now with West Virginia Case Podcast. So big thank you to Bill. And to everybody else, if you have something you'd like to share with me, whether it's a story or whether it's a ghost story, Bigfoot story, alien story, anything you would like to share, a local legend or lore, send me a message at westvirginiacase304@yahoo.com. Tonight we have an awesome guest coming on. We have Mark Muncy. Mark is a Ohio native that recently, now resides in North Carolina, but in between that time, he's lived in Kentucky, West Virginia, Florida. He has traveled extensively across the United States, across the world, and I could say, looking into legends and lores and doing some legend tripping. He's a folklorist. He is a historian. He's an author. He's written numerous books. Erie, Appalachia is one of them that I really enjoy. Creepy Florida. I think the other one's in Erie, Florida. I haven't got those yet, but I plan on getting those. And without further ado, let's bring on Mark. Let's see what he has to say tonight. Evening,
hey,
Mark.
I know that guy.
How you doing, buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you. I really enjoy the things you do. I do follow you on certain things, and I do know you hit a lot of events. I've been to some events where you've been, and I spoke to you a couple of times. I do have Erie, Appalachia. I thought it was an awesome book. But yeah, like I do with all the guests, I just want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. Who is Mark? Where you hail from? Just anything like that you want to tell us, and you're comfortable with telling us. And I mean, I'm sure all the listeners will be happy to hear.
Okay. Yeah. The problem is getting me to stop. That's the main problem. So, but yeah, my life's pretty much an open book. I was born up in Dayton, Ohio area. Grew up in the shadows of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the early 70s. So dating myself a little bit there. And we had family land out on the Kentucky, West Virginia, Ohio corner there, right near Ashland and between Ashland and Louisa. And so I grew up every weekend. We'd go hunting out in the Kentucky woods or Dayton, Ohio. And then after a little while, we moved over to West Virginia. And so I grew up in West Virginia, my formative years in West Virginia, and kept going back to that farm in Kentucky on the weekends. So was a city boy, but had a good country upbringing. And then around mid 80s, we moved down to Florida. The family moved down to Florida because they were tired of the mountains, I guess. My father was retiring, And then I got stuck there for 30 years before I was allowed to escape and get back into the regular world again. So, and now we're up in the mountains of North Carolina, up in the Smoky Mountains, because that's where our love is now. My wonderful wife is my illustrator, because I couldn't afford to hire an illustrator, so I married one. And she brings all the monsters and the legends to life. Most famously, I basically ran a haunted house for 30 years down in St. Petersburg, Florida, the late great Hellview Cemetery. And we based it all on local lore and legends, because I'd grown up learning, folklore tales and all that, Mothman, Grafton Monster, Flatwoods Monster, all those things. And also child of the 70s, of course, in search of formative years, Twilight Zone reruns, all that. So that fed into all this, and had some unusual experiences as a kid that couldn't explain, always wanted to. So that became part of it as well. That's the mix. And then the haunted house closed down in 2014. We were a little too popular, so the city of St. Petersburg shut us down. And that was when I'm like, hey, I've got all these stories. What am I going to do with them now? And that became the first book, which turned into Erie, Florida, which hit the bestseller list. So now 4 bestsellers on, and we've got new ones in the works. So hopefully it just keeps the trend keeps going. So,
Well, I heard you say something there about experiences as a kid. Do you mind? I mean, I know a lot of folks, that's how they get into this subject.
yeah.
Experience as a child, or, like Bigfoot, a lot of people are like, yeah, it's something I watched on TV. It was whether In Search Of, or whether it was Patterson. But my experience, as a child, is what got me into the creepy stuff, or the weird, the strange, the high. And it had nothing to do with Bigfoot. I mean, that's primarily what I kind of delve into now. But that's what got me into the paranormal stuff. So could you tell us what happened to you that got you started in that?
There were several things. My earliest childhood memory was in this house in Dayton, Ohio, that I had the room up on the second floor. It was a 3-story house, typical one of those Sears constructed houses that you always see, that you used to be able to buy out of the back of a Sears catalog. And littered downtown Dayton, Ohio was filled with those. And I had the room that connected to the attic. And so that was where they had stuffed me. My brother lived in the basement. He had that all converted out. My parents had the bedroom across from me. My grandmother lived on the first floor. So it was a big house. We were all crowded in there, but me up in that attic. And one of my earliest memories is going up into the attic to play. That was my playroom, and seeing a shadowy figure there in my playing with my toys. And then it turned to look at me, and glowing red eyes that I still get goosebumps 50 years on thinking about that, terrified me. I still see it as clear as a bell. I remember waking with my mom carrying me down the stairs going, oh my God, are you okay? Are you okay? I blacked out, I guess. And I'm not saying it was a shadow person or an entity of something, but that is my earliest memory I have. So I've always been drawn to that supernatural, I like to call it preternatural stuff we don't understand yet. Someday we might. The old great Shirley Jackson coined that phrase, and I love it. So,
well, with that being said, because I know it piqued my interest in my life, and I know my brother had experiences in the same house that I did, but he doesn't talk about it, and he really doesn't go into, or he doesn't have any interest in what I do. And why do you think some people do? Like you do, you have, and I have. Why do you think that? What is it? I mean, is it some odd,
It's why do some people taste when they eat parsley, was it cilantro? It tastes like soap to some people, where other people, it's one of the greatest flavorings you can put on a thing. I have an allergy to garlic and onions and alliums. But my brother, who shares the same DNA as me, he doesn't have that allergy.
Right.
He's allergic to shellfish. I'm not. It's one of those things. Why does certain things work these ways and certain things don't? That's part of why we call it preternatural. I think some people are in tune to this. I think some people see things on a different wavelength or feel things on a different wavelength. That's why we have some people are convinced they're psychics and mediums.
Right.
And I can't doubt them because sometimes they've come up with some stuff that I'm like, okay, the amazing Randy, who was one of my heroes, a skeptic, never gave away that check for $1 million for proof that it was, they could find the psychic stuff. But there are some people who've hit some stuff that I'm like, wow, that's pretty incredible. And there are places I've been and things I've experienced that I cannot explain and that I've had scientist friends unable to explain. You look at the documents that they're releasing for disclosure and stuff like that. There's still little percentage that's unexplained. And that's, that's the stuff that draws me. What's that percent that we don't? And I think if we put the money into this, we can find out why some people see things, why some people don't. One of my favorite experiences was in Clearwater, Florida. There was a place called the Bellevue Biltmore Hotel. And this was before I started doing the books and everything, but I was still documenting things and all that for our haunted house. And that was a haunted attraction. And they were closing the hotel. They were going to tear it down, we thought. We were trying to save it. But there was this famous ghost up on the 3rd floor, a bellhop ghost. And we really wanted to see that bellhop ghost. And I'm like, they're tearing the building down. We got the last chance to see it. But then part of me was also like, oh, hey, they're going to be auctioning stuff off from the old hotel. Maybe I can get a piece for the haunted house. That'll be a cool little tie-in or something. And I went there thinking they would be giving stuff away. No, it was all auctioning for prices way beyond my price range. Right. But when I got there, one of the local paranormal teams from Tampa Bay was there, and they were there to see the ghosts. And I was like, oh, good. I want to see the ghosts. But it was also a fancy dress day because it was the last day. So they had all these people dressed as like a Gatsby party. There were people dressed like Marilyn Monroe. There were people in suits. And of course there were bellhops wearing the old bellhop uniforms. And I was like, oh, so much for, seeing the ghost, but it was cool seeing all these people in bellhop costumes. But we're like, as the auction was raging and things were going crazy, we're like, let's go up to the 3rd floor. Let's go up to the 3rd floor. Cause we definitely were standing out. We were not in suits or anything like that. So we get up, we get in the elevator, we go up to the 3rd floor, and we're looking down the end of the hall to the room where the bellhop comes out the door, and there's a bellhop. And we were like, oh, they knew somebody was going to come up here. Bravo, right? And the guy walks past us, and we're like, good job, good job. And there's 3 of us next to me, and the 2 guys next to me are like, wow, that was great. And I was like, yeah, they knew somebody was going to come up here. And then the girl in the end goes, what are you guys talking about? She didn't see him. She had no clue he was there. And I'm like, the guy, the bellhop. And she didn't see him. And
how close was she to you?
Like 2 people next to me in a hallway, just coming out of an elevator. So 2 feet next to me. And the guy walked past us to go to the stairs. So I'm like, and I look over at the stairway door's closed. So I look down the stairs. He's not there. I'm like, somebody's punking us. So I run into the elevator to go back down to find out who came and got us. Now, what's funny is they had infrared cameras. They had, tape recorders. They had EMF detectors. None of them turned it on because we were going to set it up at the end of the hall. I get downstairs. I'm talking to every bellhop, every person. I'm asking for a description of the guy. Nobody knows who I'm talking about. Nobody was up on the 3rd floor but us. So did we see a ghost? I don't know. We saw something and I can't explain it. So, and he looked as real, as solid as you and me. So some people say, well, I've never seen a ghost. I've never seen one. I don't know what I saw, but it was solid. It looked flesh to me. It was not ghostly or transparent. Right. I've seen some apparitions that have been, that look like photo negatives and some shadow people and stuff like that. But that was real to me, real to the 2 guys next to me. Girl in the end didn't see anything. Why didn't she see anything and we did?
Yeah, that is strange. I've even heard stories where, not just sightings, but people on investigations will have recorders side by side. Like
Yep.
right in the hand of the of investigators side by side. And one investigator's recorder will record something, and the other one doesn't. And I always wondered, why is that? Is it, even if it's the same recorder, why is one picking it up? I mean, is it maybe these things have a certain wavelength that's something they pick up, and maybe that's what we do as well. We each person can perceive a different wavelength or vibration. Maybe that's why you've seen it or seen the bellhop and this other person didn't.
Yeah, there's like, I mean, science is weird. We're finding out new things all the time. Like one of my favorite things is there's a frequency that you can't hear once you're past like 20 years old. Yeah, but when you're a kid, you can hear it, right? Yeah. And that's one of those things. We just learned about that in the last couple decades. We didn't know about that. So scientists just pretended it didn't exist, but now we know. And we're learning stuff like that all the time. And that's why I like preternatural instead of supernatural. It's stuff we don't understand yet, but we'll stumble on it. We'll figure it out. And I keep thinking every year, with cell phones and all this other stuff, we're going to catch something somewhere sometime. That goes to Bigfoot, UFOs, or UAPs, whatever we want to call them. Every 20 years, we change the name. Yeah. And, all those things. I think ghosts, whatever. It's all going to be something at some point.
So in the years of Florida, of living in Florida, I mean, that happened in Florida. What would be a tale or a folklore story that you investigated, that you learned through your investigation was completely not correct? Or I guess that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, there's a few we debunk in the books, and that's part of the fun of digging into the history behind these things. Sometimes the history is so much worse than the ghost or monster or legend. One of the ones that kind of brought me to the forefront and got me a lot of traction in the early days was there's a legend in Tampa Bay called Many Lights. And this one fascinated me my whole time running the haunted house. We had done a tribute to it every year in our haunted house because it was basically, if you said the name Many Lights 3 times, and it's always these things, say it 3 times. You got to mock the Trinity. It's just one of those things. Say it 3 times, and these lights, these little green lights, will come out and chase you. And if they catch you, you'll disintegrate, especially if you're a kid, right? That's kind of a crazy legend, right?
Right.
But that was if you on a certain side of town, you'd heard that version. But if you went to the south side of town, the not so nicer area of town, it was a completely different legend. And it was, if you say the name Many Lights, you risk invoking this legendary lady. Her name was Minnie Lightning. And she was the voodoo queen of St. Petersburg. And she's the reason we have so many storms in Tampa Bay, because she summons the lightning. Tampa Bay Lightning's our hockey team. And, but she doesn't send lights after you. She sent her gator boys. And her gator boys were little alligator men, and they would come and steal your children. Okay. I was like, whoa, that escalated quickly, right? And you would, but it was always about children, right? And when I started asking around about the south side about that, everybody over there was like, son, don't go messing with Many Lights. Right. Many Lights will get you. She'll get you. Up north, it was kind of say it 3 times. But down south, it was, I mean, people were literally terrified. And I got one guy, probably one of my favorite stories is this one guy, he lived on the south side in the 60s, and he went to this church, and the preacher's daughter went missing one day, and they were convinced Many Lights had gotten her. And they figured out which house Many Lights lived in. And they went and they threw rocks through her window and smashed her and said, Many Lights, come out. We know you're in there. Let loose the preacher's daughter. And I said, well, did you see strange lights come out after you, or gator boys? And he said, we did see strange lights. It was the police. They came and chased us. But, but then we found out the preacher's daughter showed up a couple of days later. She'd run away from home. So we felt bad. We found out it was this little old lady who lived there. She wasn't many lights. So we saved up all our money and bought her new windows at the end of summer. And she said that was good for us, but don't mess with her, because she knew many lights, and many lights would get us if we ever messed with her again. So all this, long story, I dug into it, right? Why is this so different? And while I was writing Erie, Florida, I came across a story of a Mennonite lady. And I was like, Mennonite mini lights, that's kind of close.
Right.
And she ran a boarding house, but this wasn't in St. Pete. It was over in Gibsonton, just across the water. And Gibsonton's the circus freak show town, right? That's where Ringling wintered down in Sarasota, and all the freak show people stayed in Gibsonton. Mm-hmm. And it's still a circus town. That's where American Horror Story Freak Show takes place. And a couple reality shows take place there with the descendants of the freak show people. So we thought maybe, and then her boarding house burned down because people were upset that she was letting circus people stay in her boarding house. So we thought maybe that was it, right? Maybe that's the story. And sadly, I had a due date. So that's when we went to press with that. Now, 6 months after the book's out, I'm telling the stories and all this. I'm researching our next book, Freaky Florida, and the answer to mini lights fell in my lap. Literally, I opened this book of postcards from old tourist attractions, and a fan fell out in my lap. One of those you hold up, cool yourself off with fans. And it's from a place in the 1930s, and it was an alligator farm in St. Petersburg from the 1930s. And on this fan was 2 African-American kids being chased by alligators. And it said gator bait, shows daily. And it was like, oh God. So I had to research more and dig into this alligator farm. And that's what it was what was happening was they were going to the south side of town and kidnapping poor children and children that were out late at night that they didn't think anybody'd miss, usually African-American kids, and then throwing them in the alligator pit to entertain tourists the next day. Because alligators, if you ever go to an alligator farm in Florida, like Gatorland, which we love and all that, the alligators just lay there. They don't do anything unless it's feeding time. Right. And that's why everybody loves when they throw out the chickens and all that. But can you imagine if a bunch of kids were thrown into the alligator farm and chased? So the legend, beware of mini lights, the gator boys will get you, was beware of the men with lights, the gator boys. They will steal your children.
Wow.
And that's, how terrifying is that, right?
Right.
I mean, and there was all this mythology behind her where she hates Marie Laveau, so she would send the hurricanes from St. Pete to New Orleans and all this. There was all this great mythology to her, but it's the real history was so much worse. It's terrifying. And
yeah,
that's I'm glad we got to do the audio book for that and got to update it. So with the proper history. But sometimes that's what happens. Even that, which is a legend I presented, within 3 years, it was already a completely different story.
Wow. Yeah, that's way more horrific than just being chased by lights. Mm-hmm. It's I couldn't imagine that. Like you said, it's sometimes the history is worse than the actual story.
The truth can be stranger than fiction.
Yeah,
and that's just, one or two of the ones we found. Exactly. So.
Well, what's the other one? I mean, you said one or two.
There's more, but that one, some we were able to just debunk because it was fun stories. One of my favorites is the Devil's Chair in Cassadaga, which is this cemetery near Cassadaga. It's not in Cassadaga. So
right.
Cassadaga is a town that was founded by psychics. It's in Central Florida. It's about a half hour from Orlando. It has more psychics and witches per capita than Salem, but you don't hear about it because it's a tiny town and it doesn't have the history that it does. But it's still middle of nowhere, and there's this legendary chair in the cemetery. It's like a stone chair that you sit in.
Right.
And if you sit in it at midnight, a dark presence will make itself known, and it's the devil. And you have to, and if you sit there, he will grant you a wish. All right. So the main thing about that is there are several chairs in that cemetery because they're mourning chairs, which was a fashion in the 1800s. You built these chairs out of brick, and you would, if you're going to a cemetery to visit your loved ones, you want a nice place to sit down, and chill with the in-laws. So one of these chairs has this legend, and they made it so that it's private property, this cemetery. So you can't go there after dark. And if you break in there after midnight and you sit on that chair, you will be visited by a dark presence. It's called the police, and the police will throw you in jail for trespassing. So don't do it. So they changed the legend where it was, if you left a beer for the devil would give you a wish in the morning. The beer would be drunk in the morning and you'd have your wish. Well, I'm sure the police enjoyed their beers for a while. It's also near a college now. There's a college that's been built near that town as all these legends grow up. So I'm sure some college kids wanted free beers. So that became their legend. People still leave beers there, which is sad. But it's just a mourning chair. It was not built by the devil. It was built by this one family. We have the construction permits. We have everything for it.
Right.
We know the family that built it. It is a beautiful cemetery, and it does have a lot of psychic history and all that. So yeah, there's ghostly encounters there and all that. But remember, this town had to go through the satanic panic. So they pretended for a long time that there were no ghosts. And we don't want anything to do with ghosts. We certainly don't have the devil's chair. And there is no cemetery in Cassadaga. And only recently have they realized, with the advent of Discovery Channel and the Learning Channel doing nothing but ghost shows and demon shows, suddenly, oh yeah, we got ghosts everywhere. Come to our ghost tours. They were hiding in this hotel in the closet. We found them all now. Come on out. But bring your money. But
yeah,
the devil's chair, we debunked it. It's still a fun place to visit, and the folklore behind it's cool.
Yeah,
but that sort of thing.
Well, you mentioned that devil's chair. A friend of mine lives out in the Midwest, and I think it's in Missouri, if I'm not mistaken, is where the chair's at. She sent me a picture, and it's in the local cemetery, and it's near. I'm pretty sure it's Missouri because she's actually a track coach at a university out there, and I'm pretty sure it's within distance of that university, and it's kind of the same lore, or they call it the devil's chair.
Traveled, that lore traveled all over and stuff. So, but then you find another thing like the devil's tree,
right,
which is down in Port St. Lucie, and that one is a really terrible place where a serial killer killed like several people and tied them to the tree and did terrible things to them. And they've tried to burn the tree. They tried to poison the tree, and it's still growing. It's still doing great. And they put it in a park now and hid it, so it's not on the main trail. And they even have a couple fake devil's trees down there that if you're walking the main path, you won't ever see the real devil's tree and all that. But that's another hour-long story. I won't get into that, but again, it's one of those places, man, it's a creepy place because what really happened there is even worse. But there's definitely some unsettled things in the area, and the energy there is really whack. So
wow. Okay, let's jump into the since I'm up here in West Virginia, let's jump into Erie, Appalachia. There's one thing I want to talk to you about here in a little bit, and we talked to it before we come on camera. But what is not necessarily here in West Virginia, but in Appalachia, what is one of the this creepiest, the weirdest lore stories, whatever that you've come across
Man.
Regardless of the state.
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, we literally, it was 2020, so we basically decided we were just going to do a West Virginia book, but it had some stuff that tied into Ohio, and then I had some stuff that I wanted to put my stuff in Kentucky, and I wasn't sure if this was going to be a hit like the 3 Florida books had already been, and I've been dying to do an Appalachia book for forever. Thankfully, 2020 hit. I mean, not in a good way. It was terrible, but that freed us up to do the whole Appalachian Trail in 2020. Now, we didn't hike the whole trail. I'm a 50-year-old epileptic at that time. I was not going to be hiking the Appalachian Trail, but we hit a lot of it driving along, hitting different stops and talking to people and getting their stories. And that was the basic premise for it. But then we started realizing some stuff was a little further abroad and things like that. And then families started coming to me with all their stories and legends because they'd seen how well I'd treated everybody in the Florida books. And I'd been doing a couple of the TV shows and some documentaries. So people started getting to know my name. So I started getting more emails and letters back. And I was posting in more social media saying, hey, I want to know your stories. And I'd like to talk to them all. And I'd been appearing on podcasts for numbers of years and radio shows, Coast to Coast AM and all that fun stuff. So my inbox was getting flooded. So I was able to talk to a lot of people who had never told their stories before. So there are some that just gave me the willies that I was like, I got to go meet these people in person and get their story and see the land this is on. Because I don't write about any place I haven't been. That's one of my big rules is we've got to actually be there in person. You know, boots on the ground makes a big difference. So one of the ones that gave me the biggest creeps was this family in Huntington, West Virginia, had sent me a letter that said, we have some letters from a descendant that my grandmother kept all the letters in these nice boxes. And we were going through them and we stumbled on some weird stuff and we would like you to check it out because we've seen you on a couple shows. We like you, come out. So I go up to their house and they're like, we don't want any publicity. We don't want our names out there or anything. And I'm like, oh, those are my best kinds of stories. I like those because they don't want to get, they're not just trying to make a name for themselves and get a TV show. And the letters were nice and cataloged. This lady must have been so OCD back in her day, the little grandma. And she's writing to her, I guess, son in Olympia, Kentucky. And he's working in a mine over there, an iron mine. And she's writing him and he's writing back. Well, what I have are his letters. I don't have hers, right? I don't have her side of the conversation, but we have every letter he sent back in order. And the one letter is basically, can't wait for the reunion. Looking forward to seeing y'all. I miss everybody, blah, blah, blah. How's Aunt Tuesday? How's this? All this fun stuff. And then down the bottom is like, weird things been happening at the mine. We blew open a new vein, a new wall collapsed near it into a new cave system. And in that cave system were these things sitting on a bear carcass eating it. And they looked at us with big eyes, scraggly hair, and long claws, and were sitting on it like a frog. And they looked at us, and we all ran. But they were not scared by the explosion at all. And we all ran. What should we do? And then sign, watch his face. And then I'm like, okay, that's an interesting letter. Next letter is from him. Hey, Mama, everything's great. We've so glad that you guys responded as quickly as you did. You were right. We didn't work anymore until the boss man hired some men with guns to go in and clear out the cave. And they brought out some bears and a few of those things, put them on the tractor. We went back into work. Okay. See you at the reunion, blah, blah, blah. It's like, and then I read a couple more letters down and it was just normal stuff. And, you know, and then finally, yeah, he did get the reunion, just for anybody was waiting on that. But anyway, I was like, man, if I could find her letters and all that. But I'm like, okay, Olympia, can't be too many mines in Olympia, Kentucky. It's not a big town. They're especially open in those days. So also, I'll look up some newspapers in that area, see what I can find. And sure enough, there's not in the Olympia newspaper, but in a nearby newspaper, the Lexington Herald, that week is an ad for someone in Olympia looking for men with guns to kill bears.
Really? Wow.
So there's your second set verification that every one of us dreams about, right? It's, oh my gosh, this could have happened. This could be real. And then sure enough, that mine a few years later has one of the worst disasters of all time. They're blowing up another vein, trying to get into another vein, and a dozen men are killed at least, because they don't count day workers and don't count minorities. Right. So it could have been a lot worse. It probably was much worse than the newspapers reported. And it's that exact same mine. Now, that mine is still open in that area. And I immediately looked into this. And of course, Huntington has a name for it now called the Huntington Hobgoblins. But it took place in Olympia. And the Olympia name is the Olympia Bogeymen that hang out in the caves of Olympia. And so I was like, okay, I'm this is my documented encounter of the Olympia Bogeymen. And the Huntington Hobgoblins, I still haven't found a full documented encounter, but it could have been people telling this story and it just migrated a little ways away. We find that happens with a lot of these stories where they migrate a little bit.
Right.
So
could the Hopkinsville Goblins or whatever, could that have been related to anything like that?
Not. It's only a few hours away,
right?
And it's that same cave system because it's all Mammoth Cave down there, so they could all be connected. So these didn't float and didn't wear, green goggles, but it could be the same thing. We don't know. We thought they were aliens, but maybe they were things that came up from the earth. Who knows? Again, preternatural. We don't know. They saw something.
What about, I mean, I've heard lore of, like, for cave systems and tunnel systems and stuff like that, of Tommyknockers. Would that be something maybe similar, or
who knows? Again, would be similar. These are, something that lives in the earth that we don't understand. These things, he talked about the weird eyes, the scraggly hair. It wasn't like a detailed Lovecraftian description. I'm sad that I would love to have gotten, when Carrie draws these things, we like to talk with original witnesses, or at least second gen witnesses, like where the family talked to the guy who's, grandpa told that story 100 times. So we know it by heart, that sort of thing. But we much prefer getting the original drawings and stuff like, going back to the original witnesses. That's why our Flatwoods monster doesn't have arms.
Right.
When she drew it, because when we talked to the two surviving witnesses at the time, they said it didn't have arms. They only added those when the New York guy drew it for the newspaper. And that's, but every time you see Flatwoods monster, it's going like that. But,
they also said it wasn't a biological creature. It was something mechanical.
Or maybe like something reptilian behind the portholes that were eyes. Yeah. So
they both stated that they believed that what they saw was a mechanical, or something non-biological, but it could have been a vessel of some sort. It was pretty cool was last year I was at the local library doing some research on giants and stuff in this area. And I was talking to the local historian in there, and I was like, kind of trying to not feel weird about talking about certain things and, what I was looking into. And I was like, well, I said, just for, for lack of better words, I'm looking for some strange stuff and it's in cemeteries that supposedly giants were buried in cemeteries. And I'm sitting there and he's, oh, that's cool. And he said, well, here's this book for this cemetery. And he goes, you want to hear a strange story? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. He said, the Flatwoods monster story. I'm like, I sure do. I said, I'm pretty, very familiar with it. And he's like, he looks at me and goes, well, I seen that thing. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah, it was in 1952. He said, I wasn't that old. He said, I was only like 3 years old. And he said, I know, that seems like an awful young age to remember something. He said, but I still remember it. He said, even my sister will tell you that how I reacted the time I seen it. He said he was in his bedroom and he actually lived a little way down the road. There's an actual town called Strange, West Virginia. It's out past Gasaway. Well, that's where he was living. And
right in between it and Frametown.
Right. And he was in his room and for some reason his attention was drawn to the window. So he got up, he looked out the window and he described the same thing. He said, I didn't see something biological. He said, I saw what I can only describe as a mechanical thing. He said, it looked like, he said, he said some of the pictures depicted having like a skirt on this and that. He said, no, that was far from it. He said, this thing looked like it had, how did he say it was? The base of it had lines, but they were looked like pipe work. And he said everything was asymmetrical. Everything was perfect aligned. And he said it had this sheen to it. He called it luminosity is how he said it didn't glow like emit light. He said it looked like it just almost like it was glowing in the dark in a sense. But he remembers seeing that and running to his parents' house saying there was this thing outside and they didn't believe him, but
of course not.
When I talked to him, the only bad thing about when I actually talked to him is he told me the story, but he's like, I don't want to be recorded. He said,
to this day, we still get that.
Yeah.
People don't want their names out there. They don't want their family names out there. And I'm like, that's why I'm like, I have to tell the stories. At least I have to document them my way as best I can. I don't put anything in the books that's private property that somebody does not want in the books. That's just the rule. I get people, why didn't you put this place in your books? Because it's private property and they don't want people going there. There's a place that we've got activity at that we've got teams investigating currently that makes Skinwalker Ranch look like nothing. But we can't talk about it because they don't want any information about it. They don't want talking about it. And I'm like, this is the stuff that please, this would blow things wide open, but we can't talk about it. And it kills me. But I know at some point it'll get mainstream and then we can talk about all this. And that's when, the world changes. But I hope it's within my lifetime, but who knows? Yeah. I mean, we're already talking about it more with these podcasts and TV shows than if I, 6-year-old me had known that this was all coming, I'd have been like, wow, I should have dedicated my life to this sooner.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the past, I know it's with me with West Virginia Cryptids and Strange Encounters. I think I started it 7 years ago. It's nice. The people that's come to me and said, hey, I would love to share this story with you. I've never told anybody this, but how do I want to put it? I don't want to like blow my, toot my own horn here, but they said they feel like because
you treat them with respect.
I honor their respect, honor their privacy. They're willing to come forward and talk to me. And that's what I take pride in that. And I think more people should. I mean, they shouldn't be out there just to grab that story to make that buck for somebody else or for themselves.
It's still funny because when I go to these conferences and talk, we go to the Bigfoot conferences. And if you're in the Bigfoot conferences and you're talking to the Bigfoot people, and then you bring up UFOs or ghosts or even Dogman, sometimes they go, "You're crazy," and you're like, "But you're talking about Bigfoot," And then you go to the UFO conference, it's the same thing. You bring up ghosts or Bigfoot, you're crazy, go away, And then you go to the ghost conferences, they won't talk about Bigfoot or UFOs. It's finally there are some teams and shows like you and or us at Eerie Travels and a few others that are like, hey, there is some connections here, guys. There's some overlap. Why do you think the footprints disappear? Why do we think, we can't, why they disappear from sight and stuff like that? I think there's more to all this, and hopefully someday we find that genetic link that why some of us can see it, some of us can't, why some people can hear them, some people can't. And, but who knows at this point? It's, again, that's not me. My job is just to document the stories.
Right. So. I agree with you. I mean, I tell people, when it comes to certain things like Bigfoot with me, I listen to the people's stories, no matter what that story is. At this point in time, with the things that I've taken, I guess you'd say, from it, and with the evidence that it's presented, to me, it's going to be most likely it's an animal of some sort. It's a flesh and blood animal. But there is certain things that seems to be attached to that is weird. Yeah. Whether they're directly attached, I don't know. So I'm not afraid to take that side and listen to it and put it over here and know that it's there. Then when I get something else again, then eventually there's going to be a time where you can make that connection. Somebody is, whether it's me, you, or whether it's you and I combined or a whole group combined, if we share this stuff, we're going to probably find that connection. And that's what I tell people. Don't be afraid to share your story. If you want to remain anonymous, great. But if you want it, you want other people to hear that story and will know if you help you validate what you've seen. I'm telling you, somebody else down the line somewhere has experienced the exact same thing.
I am all about document, because everybody's got that crazy Uncle Joe saw Bigfoot or an alien, back in the 70s. And then like, well, did you put that on the BFRO database? You put that on the MUFON database or whatever? Right. What? And I'm like, put that up there. Just put that random date, it was in 71 and in Ohio, somewhere on, near Cincinnati. Okay. Go to MUFON or Bigfoot art database, 71 near Cincinnati. Suddenly there's like 17 entries in that same area. Crazy Uncle Joe wasn't crazy. He saw something that changed his life. And, that's what I'm all about. And we've got, but again, with that, I believe it's probably something we are, an animal out there, but I'm also open to the other stuff because I've had a couple Bigfoot hunters that are on some of the big name shows come to me anonymously, but not anonymously. They came to me and said, please put this on your show or in your books anonymously, because if I come out and say this, I'm never going to be asked to talk at any of these things again. Okay. And one was basically, he was hunting a skunk ape down in Florida and got what it seemed like an alien abduction, case. And we put that on a listener episode where I put it as a random listener tale. And sure enough, I got some other responses from some other people who were like, that's what happened to me. And I'm like, if we could talk about it, it would be great. But that's why I don't get taken seriously by some of the Bigfoot companies or the UFO companies or this, but I've been on all the shows because they treat me as a folklorist, which is what I am. Right. I like to call myself a parajournalist sometimes because it's like, I'm just trying to get the information that nobody else wants to talk about. That's what Charles Fort started. My mentor, Charlie Carlson, who wrote Weird Florida years ago. That's how he started. That's what it's all about for me, is getting the stories. I go with Bigfoot hunting teams. I go with UFO hunting teams. And I go with ghost hunting teams and I get their stories. And sometimes we get more. So one of my favorite things is I went with a bunch of YouTube vloggers to a haunted house in Brooksville, Florida, the May Stringer house. And it's one of the most haunted locations I know and one of the most haunted locations I've ever been in. But they do a haunted house charity event in their haunted house. right? It's so they have guys jump out with the, and stuff, everything in the house every Halloween. And I brought these YouTube vloggers there to show them the haunted house and give them a little tour of the upper floors that weren't part of the haunted house. But there's a famous ghost up on the 4th floor called Mr. Nasty. And he likes to be mean to people and all this. Well, we'd already done the tour. Everybody else was leaving. And I'm like, can we just have a few minutes up in the attic with the YouTubers? I want to show them the real history and tell them the real history. And also I wanted a few minutes with the ghost, right? And they all agreed. The docents were shutting things down. They know me, so they let me upstairs. They knew I'd keep an eye on everybody. And we go in the attic and I lock the door and I'm telling them the story of the ghost. We're spending a few minutes in there. We've already had a fun night. And right when we think nothing's going to happen and we're all like, okay, time to go, I'm checking out telling them one little story about a doll thing that happened earlier. And we were actually trying to debunk what had happened earlier. We thought something had shifted or something. And while we're doing that, the door to the attic, which was locked, but I'd closed it and locked it, flies open on camera from 4 different vloggers filming me talking, catching it right behind me. And goosebumps now just thinking about it. And so these guys are big name vloggers. They're Tampa J, Chris the Girl, and another one called Aimless Adventures were the ones that actually caught it on camera. And all 3 of them posted the next day, ghost caught on camera at haunted house. And I still think that's probably the best evidence I'm ever going to get. And it was by chance, pure chance. And that's, sometimes that's how it happens.
Well, we're coming on an hour, and I told you there was a certain topic I wanted to talk to you about.
Yes.
But I want to share this right here first before I
Okay.
get into that. It's from Nancy. I want to see what you think of this.
All right.
It says, Lesson Mark, I have a reoccurring dream since I can remember of a machine in the center of the earth. And in my dream, I'm having to take care of keeping the machine running. Very intense. What do you think of that?
Recurring dreams are something that a lot of people have. And there's definitely some symbolism in that. I am not a dream interpreter. I am not a expert in that field by any means, but I know people who are. So I would recommend reaching out to some people. I'm sure, Les, you have a few as well, right? But we have a fun group on Eerie Travels on our Discord where we have a young witch group that gets together. We have a bunch of others like that get together and they all talk and share techniques and ideas and stuff. So that dream interpretation might be a place to go. I'm sure there's plenty of places that people are not going to think weird of you. That means something. If you're having that dream over and over again, your body or your brain or something else is telling you something. Now, do I believe there's a machine at the center of the earth? I don't know. I don't know what's down there. I like to think it's a molten core and all this like we think, but then every couple 20 years, we thought it was different. We keep thinking it's different. It's different. We keep finding out more science and things are different. So who knows? Maybe you are keeping it going there, Nancy. And thank you for that, because I'd hate for the planet to stop spinning.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And she also puts on here, I've always wondered if when you're dreaming, if you can travel and leave your body. I'll let you answer that as well, but I will say yes. I believe my dad claimed that he was able to do that for years. He'd said he could, when he worked in a different state, he told us that he was able to travel and he could come and check in on us kids and my mom. And my mom's like, no, I don't believe you can do that. And he looked at her, and I remember sitting there in the living room when he was talking to her about this. And he said, okay. He said, when I go to work, he said, on this day, I think it was like, maybe it was Monday or Tuesday, I forget. He said, on this day at this time, you watch, which Richie, which is my youngest brother at the time, he was very young. He was just an infant, taller to an infant. He said, you watch him at this time, he'll start laughing hysterically in his sleep. And we did. We sat there, and my mom was there. I was there. My other brother, he had went to bed, but and I remember, and my little brother just starts like so much tickling, just like tickling under the arms, just laughing, his little face off. And to that day, after that, I was like, yeah, it's possible.
Remote viewing, astral travel, all that. There is so much documented stuff. Hey, the government believed it. Look at the men who stare at goats and that whole super soldier program that they were trying to do. I mean, if the government's willing to throw money at it, there's something there. And the fact that we got some of that leaked is cool, but we think there's more to it. We know the Russians invested in it. We know others have invested in it too. So there's something to it. Yeah, I do believe it can happen. It hasn't happened to me, but I do believe it can happen. So
wasn't there experiments done in Montauk, the Montauk boys or something like that?
Experiments. There's like I said, Minister Goats, Project Stargate.
Right.
There's a bunch of stuff like that out there, and MK Ultra even hit on that a little bit. And these are things we know existed, and that's the ones that we know about. What are the ones that they don't tell us about?
Exactly. All right. Since the reason I wanted to share that little piece that she was talking about the traveling. It's a different travel, but I wanted to talk to you about a certain traveler here in West Virginia, and that would be Inured Cold, and the connection that you've later found. But could you explain or talk a little bit about Inured Cold and the Woodrow Derenberger experience?
Yeah, the Derenberger incident.
Yeah, the incident, and then what you found in later research later in years.
Yeah, Woody Derenberger is driving home from Parkersburg, West Virginia, one night late. He's in his work truck, and he sees a car blitz past him, and it's like it's being chased by this sideways cigar type craft floating over the ground, and then it blocks the road and pulls him over, and then it kind of floats over to the side and lands, and out of it comes a man in a nice suit, smiling at him, and has him roll down the window and says, hello, my name is Inured Cold, and I mean you no harm. I'm a searcher, I'm a traveler, and I come from a far off place. And he starts asking him all these questions. And the big thing is he's never saying anything. He's doing it all telepathically. And Woody answers all the questions he can, and what is that place up there? Oh, it's Parkersburg. And is that where you live? No, we live near it. And that's where we all work. And he's, oh, okay. That's what we call gatherings and stuff like that. It's a really fascinating conversation, and shook him. And then the guy's like, we will see you again, Mr. Cold. My name is Inured Cold. And then he goes back to the ship, and then he sees somebody else pull the guy into the ship, and it takes off. Now, in the day, we hadn't really done much alien abductions, alien encounters. There's been flying saucer reported a lot by this time. Right. Roswell was a thing and all that. Saucers over DC, that flap, it all happened right before this. So UFO mania was hot, but not like this. And he went home, told his wife, and his wife was like, you need to tell the press. He wasn't going to tell anybody. And you need to tell the cops, and you need to tell the press. And so he did. And we have the Derenberger tapes, which are amazing to listen to. And they are stored in the Mothman Museum, which is him describing these encounters and everything. And he wrote a book later called The Man from Lanulos, which was the planet Inured came from, supposedly. And also he came back and even took Inured to his planet, or Inured took Woody to his planet, and all this other stuff. So it's a huge, fascinating study. And Woody went to his grave. This happened, and this was real. And his little daughter, Tanya, who wanted nothing to do with all of this, she kept having encounters with him herself, supposedly. And so she knew Inured Cold and all this. Now, Inured took on this thing because they started calling him the Grinning Man, because what he said, he smiled a lot and all that. So suddenly he became basically like creepypasta folklore, the smiling man. He became the Joker with these crazy smile, and he would haunt your dreams and all this other stuff. But it was just an odd thing, right? But he was becoming famous. Now that's, it's just one of those wonderful pieces of Florida folklore. And John Keel, or West Virginia folklore, and John Keel, when he was doing the Mothman prophecies, found out about all this because this was shortly before that. So he was fascinated with it. And so he started researching that while he was researching the Mothman flap that was going on. And so he had to tie those together. He was convinced they were connected. And that's why we have Mothman prophecies with Inured Cold showing up in that. But of course, reality, we don't know if that really happened and all that. Keel, the genius he was, also was writing fiction,
Right.
We love Keel, but he wrote for Playboy. Come on. That's not that Playboy wasn't an amazing magazine for the article. Very, very integrity. But all that said, it was just a footnote in history to me. It was one of those great, cool stories that I knew about. And while I was doing the Florida books, Eerie had hit, Freaky had hit, Creepy had done well because I've done a bunch of the ghost shows. And I was working on my fourth one. I was trying to do Appalachia, but I was being drawn into. So I was doing a book on Florida UFO cases. And one of the sightings that came up was the Crestview incident, which was in South Florida, the Miami area. Not Crestview, Florida. Many people think that's actually up in the Panhandle. But this was a Miami suburb called Crestview. And they had a saucer with several other craft buzz a school in the middle of the day. And teachers saw it, students saw it, dozens, hundreds of witnesses saw this thing. And I mean, it comes right down next to the school. There is no keeping kids in class. They're all running outside looking at this thing, teachers looking at this thing. And like the big classic saucer, a bunch of little things. We would now call them the Tic Tac UFOs, but at the time they were just little weird things, and they all fly away, and that's it. But then the military shows up and starts interviewing all the kids at the school, all the witnesses. And one of the kids says, oh, they were flying around like helicopters. So the next day in the newspapers, 10 minutes of terror was nothing but helicopters. Nearby Coast Guard helicopters on maneuvers. But there's no records of any Coast Guard helicopter maneuvers that day, anything like that. And it, again, passes down into the annals of UFO folklore. I don't know why it wasn't as big as Roswell, all that. But because everybody was told it was helicopters, all the kids were like, oh, I guess it was helicopters. I swore it was like a flying saucer. But come the 2000s, and the Navy tapes leak, right? About the time my books are out. So that had just come out. So I start getting emails from some of these kids who are now in their 60s, 70s and older, and even, are saying, I knew it wasn't a helicopter. That's what I saw. That was what those little things were. And so I start interviewing a bunch of the witnesses for this. And one of them's like, you need to talk to this guy. And I go down to Florida. Again, doesn't want to go on the record because he works for the school board to this day. And he's an elected official, so he can't go on the record until he's certain he's not going to get laughed out of office. But he was one of the kids who the government interviewed at his house. And his dad had kept a journal. It was one of those family address books, right? Where you just put everything down every day. So it had lots of family names and phone numbers. But that day, we go back to that fateful day in Florida, and there's the 3 callers that came on the house. And there are military names, 2 of them. So I'm like, great. I can do Freedom of Information Act. Find out if these guys did any deathbed confessions or, anything. Find their families. They're probably not still around. It was a long time ago. But who knows? I can maybe find out what duty rosters they worked for and all this. One was like a Captain Smith of the Air Force. I'm like, oh, that's not going to be much useful. But the one was a Sinclair, Colonel Sinclair or Lieutenant Sinclair from the Coast Guard. So I was like, okay, that one. And I have done some research on that. I found out he died not too long after that in that area. Still trying to find some family members for him. But the third name just said government man. Cold. And I'm like, oh my. And I got chills. And I looked at the guy and said, hey, do you remember this man? And he's like, yeah, he was just in a nice suit, kind of shiny, and he just smiled at me. And I'm like, did he ask any questions? And he went, no, not really. Just kind of an older man smiling at me the whole time. Gave me a weird vibe. And I start doing the math, right? This incident, Inured Cold. 6 months after Derenberger.
Wow. Now that's a piece I didn't remember you talk about before. I didn't realize it's that close.
That close. So
now, when he described him as you said shiny, suit and shiny, was he talking about the man himself, or was he talking about the suit being shiny?
The suit was very shiny, like he said it almost sparkled. Okay. So he remembered it being the military uniforms were all impressive, but he remembered that man's suit.
Wow.
Sparkling. And he remembered his smile. And now I had to explain to him who Inured Cold was. He had no idea. And he doesn't want the journal published yet, but I took some pictures and so I've got them in my archives and stored in cloud storage and backups all over the place because I never want those files going away. Just in case anything happens to that guy. But I had to go public with that, right? I was like, immediately, I called every show I could think of to try to get on with that. And Shannon LeGros of Into the Fray brought me on immediately because she understood what this meant. That maybe Inured had some government ties. And then decades later, I got to talk to Tanya Derenberger, Woody's daughter, and I asked her about that incident because she says she still talked to Inured and would have encounters with Inured. And I said, can you ask him about this? And she said, oh, there was a time that he helped our government more than a few times. Investigating other incidents. So was Inured a man in black? Who knows? But what? That was crazy.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. I remember when you, that was something you brought up on one of Small Town Monsters documentaries. And I heard you talk about that. And I was like, wow, it just blew my mind because I'd never heard of any. I mean, I heard the stories that people pass around here. Like, they went from, like you talked about him, he smiled a lot.
Yeah.
That spawned a whole nother legend and lore was the grinning man. You see the grinning man and stuff like that. But what you brought up, I've never heard before. I never heard that someone else had seen him during the investigation. So I was like, I was just awestruck when I heard that.
Yeah, that's still to this day. Again, unless we invent time travel and go down there and see for ourselves, we'll never know. But man, that's just too much of a coincidence to not have to say something about it, right? So document. So hopefully another kid comes forward and says, "Oh yeah," but they're getting up there, and a lot of them aren't around anymore. So who knows? But hopefully somebody listening to this can go, "Hey, I was there. I know somebody from that." Who knows?
And with that being said, folks, if somebody tells you a story, an oral story, that's something the folklore stories and the passion that people put behind that, like they used to, is starting to become lost. And it's people like you, Heather Moser, that we're both friends with, and others that are very passionate about documenting this stuff and recording this, whether it's oral history, whether it's through YouTube or whether it's through movies, videos. We want it still there. Let's not let this die. And then eventually, maybe, like you said, maybe another 10, 15, 20 years down the road, somebody else will find something else and make that bigger connection.
Yep.
Well,
And we got to leave these breadcrumbs, gang.
That's right.
The meemaws and peepaws are dying out.
Yeah.
And so those holler stories are going away. That's like that Olympia bogeyman that would have disappeared. Yeah. If it hadn't been for that family checking their thing, they were just going to dump all those records. And I'm like, now they're at least putting them in a museum. So, which is nice. It's like, and some museums don't want, grandpa's old photographs from the 70s and all that, but you never know. It might be something treasure in there. So please document. We have our shows. I have Erie Travels. We're on twice a week. Please, join us if you want to hear stories and stuff too. And there's enough out there. So yes, never make fun of anything that happens to anybody. Yes.
You're right.
Because as crazy as it sounds, I get every story. You get it too, Les. Now I know this sounds crazy, but
right. Well, just this, you said that, and I was about ready to say something. Last night, my wife come to me, and she has a friend that they work together. Well, the lady owns us. She's a nurse, but on the side she does catering, like charcuterie boards and stuff like that. Well, my wife helps her with that on certain days, and because they're friends and stuff. And her friend told her, she goes, the weirdest thing happened at the ER last night, because she's an ER nurse. And I was like, and my wife started telling me, and I'm like, do you realize that what she's telling you has happened in abduction cases? And she goes, what? And what she told her is this lady had come in. She said you could tell that she was kind of disheveled. All her clothes, her clothes weren't dirty or anything like that, but she had mismatched clothing, and you could tell that there was something
wrong and usual.
Yeah. And my wife's friend said she noticed that around her arm there was a strip about my wife went about 3 or 4 inches of aluminum foil around her upper arm. And she goes, okay, this is kind of odd. She goes, things happen, because of some drug epidemics here. She goes, she knows at certain times people would do stuff like that to hide.
Yeah.
But she asked, she goes, are you okay? She goes, and this lady looks at her, she goes, I can't really tell you. And she goes, why can't you tell me? Would you rather speak to the doctor? And she goes, can I ask you why you have the aluminum foil around your arm? And she goes, the only thing I can tell you is it's there to keep the Chinese from talking to me, speaking to me through my mind. So she's like, okay, thinking, oh, this. But then they found strange square, not like patched, square burns on her back. And they said, how did this happen? And she goes, I really don't know. I can't tell you. And I really don't know. And I told my wife, I was like, that it has some of the classic signs of possible abduction and, experimental stuff. Who knows? And my wife's like, well, what about the aluminum foil? I was like, have you ever heard of people that wear tinfoil hats? Yeah. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, the people who say that, wear tinfoil hats. So these beings can't speak to them, And she was like, wow. So
it's amazing. I mean, we that's why we do what we do. Is I had a guy, alien abductee, talking about they found something in his stomach, and he's got video when he was a kid filming and throwing up constantly, made it on disclosed TV and all that. That's his famous footage. But when he was recently he was in a car accident, they scanned it. Sure enough, there's something weird in his stomach, something metallic, a foreign object. They can't figure it out. And that's, these things you think you think we've got it all figured out. There's nothing left to discover. Well, no, we got a long way to go, gang.
Yep. Yes, we do. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for coming. You've been a great guest.
Les, it's a pleasure. We'll have to have you on our show. Like I said,
absolutely.
Definitely. We'll swap stories some more. And anytime you want me back, just let me know. But you guys can find me at eerietravels.com. That's where my books are. They're all over the place. They're in every Cracker Barrel in Florida, my Florida books. You're famous and you're Cracker Barrel famous. But
yeah,
feel free to reach out anytime, gang. We love stories, and that's what we're here for.
Yeah, you can also find them all on Amazon. That's where I purchased mine, and I do know all the Florida ones are on there. So definitely,
I'll be up for Grafton Monster Festival and Flatwoods Monster Festival and Mothman. I'll be at all three of the big ones up there. So looking forward to Grafton. That's the first one. So
first one, I'll be there as well. I'll be speaking. I believe you are as well, right?
Yep. I'm telling holler monsters, a little more oddball ones like those Olympia bogeymen that maybe you don't know. I've got a lot. I got one from my family land called the bench leg. I'll have to tell that story up there. So
nice. Well, again, thanks, Mark. It was a great time. I had a fun time. Very knowledgeable. Very, very fun to listen to. I've seen somebody in there say they can listen to you for hours. I agree. I could too.
There's 120 episodes of Eerie Travels. Feel free to pull them up.
There you go. Oh, you said something about the books. Were they on audiobook? Was any of them on audiobook?
One of Appalachia is, and I'm currently re-audioing Erie, Florida as we speak, and it'll be back up on Audible hopefully within a month or so. And then if enough people download them, we'll do the others too. So
there you go, folks. If you're like me, that really likes to, I do like to read, but for some reason anymore, I read 3 or 4 pages and I'm asleep. But I love to listen. I love to listen to podcasts. I love to listen to audiobooks. So if you're not into sitting and reading, definitely pick up one of those. You'll definitely, you won't regret it.
Yeah.
All right, Mark. Have a good night. I'll see you in a couple minutes, and we'll close out here for a minute.
See you on the other side, gang.
Well, folks, thank you all for coming. I had a great time. Mark's a great guest. Again, like someone said there, I can listen to him for hours. His energy, his storytelling is just awesome. Nancy, we will see you in Grafton. I can't wait to meet you in person. And with that, folks, we are going to call it a night. See y'all.